Thanks, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum, and I wanted to appoint Shayla Shrives as the recorder for this meeting. So with that, just a quick welcome to say thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for making efforts to be here in person. Thanks to anybody joining us online. We appreciate you all. The meeting is being live cast on the ACHP's Facebook page at USACHP. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shayla for a roll call of the members and to state whether any proxies are being held. Shayla. And by the way, these are press to speak mics.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. Yes, we do have 3 proxies. Proxy for member Monica Rhodes is Carmen Jordan Cox. Proxy for Frank Matero is Sunny Ward. And proxy for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs is GSA. And now our attendance. Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum. Carmen Jordan Cox.
Present.
Christopher King.
Present.
Sunny Ward.
Here,
I saw
present.
him, yeah. Chairman Reno Franklin.
Present.
Mayor Randall Woodfin.
Present.
Joe Imamura from the Architect of the Capitol.
Present.
Mike Martinez from the Department of the Interior.
Present.
Ron Tickle, Department of Defense.
Present.
Homeland Security, Tom Chalecki.
Present.
Department of Housing and Urban Development, Kristen Fontenot.
Present.
Department of Transportation, Christopher Coase.
Present.
GSA, Beth Savage, there she is.
Present.
Council on Environmental Quality, Chair Brenda Mallory.
Present.
National Trust for Historic Preservation, Carol Quillen.
Present.
National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers, Eric Hine.
Present.
And National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, Valerie Grusing.
Present.
Chair Sarah Bronin.
Here.
And we have observers, National Preservation Partner Network, Samantha Bossard.
Present.
National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, Stephanie Paul.
Present.
ACHP Foundation, Susan Barnes.
Present.
And Preserve America Youth Summits, Ann Walker.
Present.
Did I get everybody?
Just one note, we do have a proxy from DOT to GSA in case Mr. Coase leaves early. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we do have a couple of new faces here today, so before we move on to adopting the meeting minutes and the agenda, I did want to just first extend a welcome to the chair of CEQ. I think this is the first time that the chair of CEQ has attended one of our business meetings. And so I've really appreciated our partnership on a number of issues, including relating to permitting and policymaking. So I just wanted to turn it over to Chair Mallory, and then again, a couple of other new faces, just to say hello if you would like to.
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be able to be here for a few minutes today. I said we keep trying to juggle the schedule, so I actually am able to show up for some of these. I'm so excited about the work that this body has been doing under Sarah's leadership. There's just a lot of sort of systems thinking that I think is really important for the work that we're trying to accomplish in this administration. So I'm grateful for all of you and for your agencies and the partnership that we have in trying to meet the president's agenda. So thank you for having me for a few minutes.
Thank you, Chair Mallory. We also have a new representative from DOD, Mr. Tickle.
Thank you very much. My name is Ron Tickle. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environmental Management and Restoration as of 2 months ago. So just breaking in. But in my previous position, I was the DASD for real property. So I have a very good insight into the scope and scale of the issues that are facing DOD. And we're going to be talking about the Army later. We have, I think, 700,000 structures across the Department of Defense. 500-some thousand in the United States. Army owns about half of these. So the scope of the things, the types of issues we deal with are quite large, to put it mildly. So I really look forward to it. We take our historic preservation responsibilities very seriously. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. The National Trust for Historic Preservation also has a new CEO. I'd like to welcome her today, Carol.
Thank you, Sarah, and it's really a privilege for me to be here joining you all. I'm very new to the National Trust and somewhat new to preservation. My background is history. I've been in universities and colleges for most of my adult life and have learned a lot from my colleagues at the National Trust. I'm thrilled to continue to learn from you all as we do this important work together. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to welcome our newest observer, appointed in January at the National Preservation Partners Network, and its chair, Samantha Bossart.
Thank you for the opportunity for the partners to be part of this. The National Preservation Partners Network is a network of about 120 statewide and local nonprofits across the country representing the boots on the ground, the grassroots organizations carrying out the work in all of our various cities and states. And we look forward to learning and working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's everybody who's new. With that, I'm going to ask for a motion and a second to adopt the agenda found in the meeting book. Mayor Woodfin, seconded by Chairman Franklin. All those in favor? Voice vote, yes. All those in favor? Aye. Excellent. Against, abstentions? Okay. Next, I'll take a motion and a second to adopt the minutes from the November business meeting, which are in everybody's meeting book.
So moved.
Vice Chairman Tannenbaum, Member Jordan Cox. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so this is a bit of a longer welcome than normal, but with a couple of items in the agenda. The first one is a reflection on our tour yesterday. This is the second time in a row, I guess, our members' tours focused on Black history. So last business meeting, we visited the home of Frederick Douglass, and this time we focused on, I would say, people that may be less influential and less well-known. To me, the field trip represented how far we've come in historic preservation, but also how much farther we can continue to go. I wanted to start by reading the National Register nomination for Mount Zion Cemetery in 1975. It said, "Mount Zion has not been properly maintained. There are no fences or entrance gates. There are no paths or roads. Many graves are sunken. Most headstones and other markers are titled or fallen. Ancient wooden markers have decayed. Until recently, the entire cemetery was grown up in a thick woodland." So this is located in Georgetown, which is where our tour took place. And even many residents there probably still don't realize that this history is there 50 years later. It has been better maintained, I think, in those 50 years since the nomination was written, but there's still opportunities to continue to show how we care for that site. It did reinforce for me the importance of our statement on burial sites, funerary objects, and human remains, because across America there are countless sites like this one, which have been inadequately cared for and threatened. We also visited Tudor Place, which many of you know is associated with the descendants of President George Washington. It was designated as one of the first 92 historic landmarks in 1960. The nomination of Tudor Place, however, says nothing of the lives of the enslaved. Yesterday, we learned about some of the over 100 people who were exploited by the owners of Tudor Place. I really enjoyed the exhibits, the way that that history was told. It was emphasized within the house itself. That acknowledgement, their research, the emphasis on the importance of this history, I think is illustrative of the profound work that preservationists are doing across the country to do better. We are becoming a movement that doesn't reflect just one type of history, but a varied type of history, both good and bad. And so the visit yesterday continued to energize me and all the work that we're doing. I assume it energizes you too. And I wanted to thank, with that, the staff who arranged this tour, including Tanya Devonish, and the staff at both sites and volunteers, because they really enriched our experience. So thank you. Did anybody else want to make a quick comment about the visit? Member Jordan Cox.
It was a very, very powerful experience. There's so many cemeteries around the country that are built over golf courses and the like, and I think we often don't think about those who've gone before us and made it possible for us to do the things that we do. So it just reminded us we really need to spend a lot of time as individuals and collective in trying to restore these cemeteries and handle the remains properly, and to make sure we don't make some of the same mistakes we've made in the past. And the Tudor House, well, that was amazing, that the focus was really on the enslaved individuals, and the pictures in the house were of those individuals, not necessarily the descendants of Washington. So, but thank you for the experience.
Thank you.
And I encourage everybody to go to the next one. I don't know what it'll be, but I'm sure it'll be good.
Any other comments? Sure, Chairman Franklin.
I just, again, wanted to take the time to recognize staff for organizing, basically becoming professional cat herders and getting us all into the same place and on time. It was, the Tudor House for me it's a conflict. I don't like to put myself into places where those kinds of things have occurred, and the slavery is very real. It's very real to me, knowing that I've got family members who also were slaves, and as were many American Indian people, especially in the state of California. So to feel that shared experience and frustration, it's definitely there. Sensitive to those kinds of things. To go back to my hotel and do ceremony right away for myself, to keep my balance. But I don't think that we're well-rounded in our positions if we don't, feel, experience, and understand what these places hold. The fact that the gentleman wasn't celebrated for all those years who did the amazing woodwork on the top, just was eye-opening to see that. It was beautiful to see it recognized. I actually left them a suggestion because some of those plants were tended by the gentleman, who himself was enslaved at one point and whose family was commenting. In California, we're really big on seed banks. And so for all of our redwoods that are 3,000, 2,000 years plus, we keep the seeds, we keep it in specific places. And I actually offered to them to do that for the family, to get the seeds of some of those plants and give them to the family members, because here your great-great-great-grandfather actually tended to this plant. And how awesome would that be for your family to take that and continue to push it forward within your family? And so they accepted that recommendation well, and it sounds like they're going to do that, and that'll be pretty exciting to know that we had a part of that. So thank you for doing that and giving us that chance, Madam Chair.
Thank you all. Oh, sure, Member Ward.
May I add just a little bit more to that? Yeah, those English box hedges were from circa 1805, and quite big and beautiful. And not only did we get to see the beautiful plants, but we saw the tools. And his name was John Luckett, and he shaped those hedges. And it was a connection, connected us to the enduring spirit and the contributions of all of those enslaved there. Also just wanted to put another face on story at the cemetery. We saw the unity and diversity through the shared headstone of two women who had once been enslaved together and who, as freed in freedom, shared their families and their lives together and were eternally bonded there with a tombstone together. So I wanted to point that out. So thank you guys again for the tours. They were powerful and amazing. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, we realized in preparing for this meeting that it's been a year since I've been chair, and I wanted to just share some reflections over the last year. Just take a couple of minutes to reflect and take stock about where we've been together. I would say probably the most important thing I've learned so far is that although this is the smallest agency, it is, I think, the most effective and hardworking bang for your buck out there. And I have to say that the efficiency, the effectiveness, the reputation of the ACHP is driven not by me, but by the person sitting to my left, Reed Nelson. The best thing I've done this year is to sign the form that Javier and Jordan handed to me, in effect, that made Reed the executive director. So I just want to thank him for an excellent year of partnership and leadership by him across the board in every aspect of our work. I also want to thank the office directors and the staff who do their jobs with integrity, with creativity, and most importantly, with an open mind. So just to kind of talk a little bit about the things that we've done together so far. In 2023, we passed 3 policy statements, which is a record for the agency. And that resulted from your contributions, your consultation, the consultation with tribes, input from the public. The burial sites, human remains, and funerary objects policy, again, was relevant to our tour yesterday, our continued understanding to try to stop the disturbance, destruction, and desecration of burial sites. The climate change and historic preservation policy statement took a leadership position within the federal government about the intersection of preservation and climate change, and I hope we can continue to expand on that here at the agency. The housing and historic preservation policy statement brought critical updates to an existing policy, and we hope that will help to address the housing shortage. And in many cases, we've moved towards implementation, taking specific principles that you all reviewed, negotiated, amended, and now taking those and trying to implement them in a variety of ways. We also opened up our statutory responsibility to advise state and local governments on their policies related to preservation, specifically their draft legislation. We opined in Florida in a recent case. We're likely to opine in another state very soon. And we need to keep exploring how to do this. So I'm really grateful for Mayor Woodfin and Governor Carney and their offices for keeping their ear to the ground, and for the preservation partner organizations, all of the observers, the National Trust, Nick Schippo, who alert us to things that are happening that we could, in some cases, help step in and improve. With regard to Section 106, the biggest, I would say programmatically, the biggest office within our agency, we have continued to show leadership, to help federal agencies and others understand their responsibilities under Section 106. As you've heard several times, we have the largest number of program alternatives under development ever. We, again, in partnership with CEQ, are active on the Permitting Council. And I do think being proactive about what we're doing and being vocal about what we're doing, which is something that I've tried to do and we've tried to do more, is the best defense to Section 106. So I hope we can continue to do that this year and continue to be nimble in communicating the benefits of how we approach Section 106 to Congress and others. On the administrative side, and you've heard this a number of times, we have had a lot of great changes, including 7 new council members, including CEQ, 1 new observer in the Preservation Partners Network, all bringing new perspectives. We've realigned our offices and our committees to make sure that we are both expansively and effectively directing what the ACHP does. We've done a substantial overhaul to our operating procedures as well. I think one area which will hopefully have lasting impact is our expansion of capacity and expertise. This initial group of 8 staff members from the Permitting Council will be, I think, very transformative for the agency, and I think what we can do with those 8 staff members as they come in will help us position us as, again, continue to be an innovator in permitting in Section 106 and working in partnership with federal agencies to align the goal of historic preservation with all of the other values that the federal government has to promote. We've added the Experts Advisory Committee. We've had the law conference with the National Trust. We're doing an International Climate Heritage Conference. We're really trying to expand just the exchange that we have with the public, because that is our responsibility as an agency. And it's something that has been really, really fun and again, in partnership with many of you. My favorite expansion of knowledge is, of course, the intern program. It's been wonderful to have about 24 interns over the last year, each bringing different perspectives. And I know they have talked with many of you, and I really appreciate your efforts to support them. So in 2024, as we continue on into the next year, today we have something very important on our agenda, which is the policy statement on Indigenous knowledge. I hope members consider that very seriously. I hope it's adopted today. I hope we continue to accelerate the implementation of our climate and housing policy statements. I want to thank Assistant Secretary Chris Coase and the Department of Transportation for their thinking about our climate-friendly transportation line in our policy statement. DOE for starting the exchange on solar energy, distributed, not landscape scale, and housing, which we have already been in conversation with many of you about how to implement the principles in our statement. We've also, and we'll talk a little bit more about the communications program comment, but also in 2024, I want to expand the way that our relationship with tribes works, and particularly honoring that government-to-government relationship and fulfilling the executive order that was issued in December, which again, we'll talk about in just a moment. And then finally, I hope we continue to generally think really big about what we can do as a council. Preservationists can have influence. We can keep knocking on doors. We have good ideas about how to make things better, and it's the collective wisdom of this group and the consensus that we've been building over this last year on the priorities, on changing the way that we think about sort of a narrow view of preservation and really taking it out into the community, opening up our own ideas, our own processes for public engagement and input. As I said at the beginning, I think the biggest value that we have is having an open mind. And really being able to make those exchanges in service of the field. So thank you again to the council. The decisions you've made, the way you've gone about your consultation with us, your collaboration, and I'm hoping that we continue to be on what is maybe the cutting edge of preservation policy, just like Congress intended us to be. So with that, just a couple of recent activities. I wanted to thank staff again for arranging for, as part of our implementation, I guess, the roundtable in Los Angeles, which my fellow co-chair of that really interesting meeting, Member Ward, where we convened State Historic Preservation Officer Julie Polanco, the LA Conservancy, City of LA, some experts, and I thought it was a really excellent conversation about a very important issue there. And I don't know if you wanted to respond now, or if you wanted to chime in, or wait till your report. But
I think it'll just come up throughout the day, part of the conversation. So let's keep going.
yeah, I thought it was pretty great. I did want to also just mention my intention to sign a new MOU with the America 250 organization. It has undergone some changes. Vice Chairman Tannenbaum has been our liaison with America 250, but I wanted to make sure that you all knew that we would be signing on to that. And then finally, just as we continue on in the conversation of data and digitization, we won't have a big chance to talk about that today, but we are taking your feedback on that topic. I continue to keep that line of communication open, but our interest is to try to develop proposals and strategies that will help us to complement what we're doing on the tech side with some mapping work related to Section 106. Okay, so that just a couple of recent activities. I think you all know, too, on committee assignments, that we have, for the public, maybe I should say, that we carry out our work through committees that are advisory in nature. They don't have a voting authority. And just noting for the record that I recently decided to fold the Communications, Education, and Outreach Committee into all of the other existing standing committees because their work cuts across everything that we do. So along with the Experts Advisory Committee, that leaves 4 committees, and I wanted to thank Monica Rhodes for her leadership of the CEO Committee in absentia, and we'll welcome her back to say that again in person in July. But already the CEO office is integrating their reporting and efforts into our new committee structure. So thank you, everybody, for helping us make that transition. Okay. I think we can move to agenda item 2 then. All right. So first, as I have in the past, I'll just frame our conversation on the item 2, which is the chair's report on the application and interpretation of federal historic preservation standards, by saying that this is a memo, a report from me to members. Members have been briefed at committee meetings and business meetings about the nature of public comments as they came in and the status of drafts, which took much longer than I hoped to get to a final product. So I wanted to emphasize, too, that staff did not participate in the drafting of this report, except for my special assistant, who provided editorial assistance, and members did not influence the report either. So this is truly one woman's opinion. While it is just one woman's opinion, I wrote this report in order to spark conversation in line with everything that I just said about the important issues that it covers and even about the recommendations that it advances. I really feel strongly that having public engagement, robust engagement about ideas can help us as a council understand how to get to better policy outcomes. So just quickly, and you may not have had the chance to read the 600 pages of the report, so I'm going to very quickly summarize. I hear some giggles in this room. You don't hear it because nobody unmuted their mic to laugh, but that's what's happening in the room. So just on the substance of the report addresses the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, and I would say it focuses primarily on the rehabilitation standard. About 17 sentences, I think if my count is correct, that were last revised in regulatory form about 30 years ago. So in the intervening 3 decades, these standards have come to influence virtually all of preservation practice. Certainly they influence how the ACHP considers 120,000 federal undertakings every year. They govern $8.8 billion last year of private rehabilitation activity receiving the historic tax credit. They also come into play at the local commission level, where local commissions may oversee tens of thousands of projects every year. No one knows, we've never done a count, but with about 3,500 local historic regulations in place, many, if not most, tied to the standards, we can guess. So they are applied and interpreted here in DC. They are applied and interpreted by state and local regulators, and even by private parties through easements. So what I learned in the report was really interesting. It looks like decision makers have taken a fairly conservative approach in interpreting the standards. At least that's what we heard in the comments. It took some time to draft because the report assembles for the first time all prior analyses, at least the ones I could find, on the historic preservation standards. There are in Appendix D if anybody's looking for them. It then also assembled the comments that we received this summer. That was about 300 pages of comments, and I have to say, these comments were not from fringe players. These comments came from the people who, through their work, are those people leading community revitalization through preservation. We heard from the network representing the largest municipal preservation agencies in the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, including the largest such agency, the New York City Landmarks Commission. We heard from individual small-town planners struggling how to interpret the standards in light of a changing world. From some of the standard bearers and leading organizations of the preservation movement, including the National Trust and Main Street America. We heard from individual congregants seeking to understand how their worship spaces won't demolish by neglect for lack of the ability to reuse them, small business owners trying to figure out what to do with their storefronts, and nonprofit housing organizations just trying to get people housed. The comments came from Maine all the way down to Hawaii, from people who live and breathe preservation, and they work every day to see it better their communities. So it took a long time to let those comments sink in and to develop recommendations based on them, based on the history of the standards, which says they've been revised, they've been reinterpreted, and that is good. Those updates have been, I think, very positive over the years. So I want to commend the Park Service. Every time it reinterprets, every time we ourselves at the ACHP has issued new guidance interpreting those, we've added clarity, and I think people appreciate that. So with the recommendations, there's a few things in there that I hope at some point we dig into more substantively. I've suggested that immediate guidance be issued on several topics, reforms to the tax credit process, suggested that we looked into a graduated national register, which would be a colossal undertaking, but we might consider what the goal of that might be and how we might achieve the goal in ways that potentially some of the initial drafters of the National Historic Preservation Act might have actually had in mind. I've also suggested new standards on climate adaptation, including stabilization, protection, relocation, intentional release, and deconstruction. Some of these may be terrible recommendations, but I wanted to use them. I put words on the page. Maybe Carol has the same view as an academic. You put something out there, at least it can be debated. And so I hope that this report is something that sparks that conversation, as I said in the preface to the report. So far, I'm convinced that people want to talk about these issues. The first webinar that we held on this topic attracted, I think, the most number of participants ever on an ACHP webinar with very little notice, frankly, to take the temperature of the public on the comments. So I do believe that we have an opportunity here to really think through, to use our role as the agency Congress created to help advise on federal historic preservation policy, to assemble the very best ideas, and then convert them from one person's opinion to something that the council can act upon in the future. So before I say what the council might do with the report and talk a little bit more about that, I wanted to give members a chance to provide comments. And I know, Mr. Martinez from Interior, we promised that we'd call on you first, so I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. First, thanks to everyone who attended the March 7th and 19th National Park Service Best Practices Training webinars for a smooth application process for frequent tax incentive program users. 3 additional National Park Service training webinars will focus on how the National Park Service and the SHPOs review historic preservation certification applications so that applicants may better anticipate common challenges and also successful outcomes. Please visit nps.gov for additional information. And regarding the report, the Department of the Interior and others at the Regulations and Governance Committee meeting expressed concerns regarding the review and publication process. As we mentioned during the report, the committee's meeting, one of the many concerns is the lack of tribal consultation throughout the process. The Department of the Interior is being asked to review its authorities through this report. As a general rule, the Department of the Interior does so with input from tribes. Public comment on recommendations would also be included in a Department of the Interior process. In light of these process concerns, the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service are not in a position to discuss the recommendations in the report per se. However, the National Park Service appreciates all of the substantive feedback it receives on its programs. The National Park Service is reviewing the comments collected by the Advisory Council. I understand representatives from the National Park Service meet regularly with the Tax Credit Coalition, including as recently as 2 weeks ago. As offered previously, on multiple occasions, the National Park Service and Department of the Interior remain available for collaborative discussions regarding our programs, authorities, and administration priorities. In closing, I extend an invitation to you. The National Park Service will host a webinar on the application of Preservation Brief 16, the use of substitute materials in historic building exteriors, on April 25th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. This webinar will cover the recent guidance updates published in October 2023, including considerations for appropriate use of substitute materials with case examples. Application includes materials resilience in the context of a changing climate, one of many guidance resources the National Park Service has produced on climate challenges. So I would like to ask the National Park Service historic preservation experts in the room to please stand and be acknowledged. And over the break, if anybody has questions or wants information about these training programs, please look them up or visit nps.gov. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Martinez, for those comments. So I wanted to just pull out the one comment that you made regarding tribal consultation. And I wanted to ask, I know you guys have 400 attorneys, or so, from what I was told. If you could maybe tell me a little bit more about where in statute or regulation or ACHP policy this report required tribal consultation, it would be helpful for me to understand.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. And I welcome this opportunity to discuss tribal consultation, National Park Service policies, Department of the Interior policies, and the Advisory Council's policies. The Department of the Interior and the National Park Service policies align with the administration's priorities. Under the leadership of Secretary Holland, we're working hard to ensure that tribal sovereignty is recognized in all of our decision-making, and we value input from tribes, and in a few moments, we'll be talking about the value of Indigenous knowledge as well. And we're happy to have those conversations further. Thank you.
Great, and I'm just asking because in response to your comments, which did catch me a bit by surprise, I did pull out Executive Order 13175 on consultation. I did pull out to our April 2021 internal guidance about consultation. And I just want to kind of point out a couple of things in the executive order, because of course, nobody wants to be said to have shirked their responsibility to tribes, especially not me. So the EO by its terms covers agencies promulgating regulations and adopting policy statements, among other things. It covers, and I'm just going to quote from it, policies that have tribal implications, that's one quote, including those, quote, that have substantial direct effects on one or more Indian tribes, on the relationship between the federal government and Indian tribes, or on the distribution of power and responsibilities between the federal government and Indian tribes. While the ACHP isn't bound by this executive order, we have implemented it and then some through, as I mentioned, the normal course of business, but also, and more specifically, through this guidance issued by our General Counsel's Office in April 2021. So we do engage in tribal consultation on regulations and the development of those, on the development of policy statements, including the 3 policy statements that we adopted over the last year. We also extend tribal consultation to specific agreements under Section 106. And again, for the new members, those agreements are typically the higher profile agreements, the ones that cut across state or topical lines. We've also extended tribal consultation to Section 101D5 substitutions as well. So you'll hear today about some of that consultation when we talk about the Indigenous Knowledge Policy Statement. The EO does not require tribal consultation for reports without any substantive implementation materials, principles. It does not require tribal consultation for other general actions that don't, quote, have substantial direct effects on one or more Indian tribes. So I'm going to go back to my question. The report I issued on the standards is a statement expressing my views as chair to the members. It says in the report, it is a, quote, a diagnosis, a conversation starter, and a hope that preservation may continue to evolve. Last I checked, my opinion doesn't make anything happen. It's not a regulation, it's not a policy statement, it's not an implementation document. So I'm really unclear about the charge that this memo required any tribal consultation. I'm going to turn actually to our attorney, Javier Marquez. You have 400, we have 2, but they're the best. And just ask him if there is something in our procedures or policies that would have required this to go through tribal consultation.
Yeah, I mean, we do look at the Executive Order 13175, and in this case, the critical aspect of this particular document is that it's a report to the members as opposed to an adopted policy. And yet, like was mentioned, the executive order has to deal with federal policies, with tribal implications. In the memo that we have, like all agencies have, we set forth what we think the types of activities are that we carry out that may trigger that executive order requirements. And they include things such as comments on legislation, 101D5 agreements, which are the ones through which a tribe substitutes its regulations, our regulations for theirs. And then regulations and policy statements actually adopted by the ACHP. Definitely, if the membership wants to adopt a policy regarding the secretary standards, then I would say that has to be preceded by this tribal consultation. And I can see how the Department of Interior, if it's going to respond with an agency decision on what to say about the standards, I can see how they would see themselves bound to the executive order. But it is the nature of the report. It's a report from one member to the membership as opposed to an official action.
So I just wanted to put that on the record and to see if that helps to assuage some of the concerns the Interior has expressed about my actions, as opposed to any response Interior might have.
I believe I just heard Javier acknowledge that further adoption of policy on the standards would, by the Department of the Interior, would require that consideration of those concerns. As offered previously on multiple occasions, the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior remain available for collaborative discussions regarding our programs, authorities, and administration priorities, and also the treatment of tribes within the report. Thank you.
And just on that last note, I think fewer than 1% of the pages in this report actually address tribal issues. I'm not sure that that is helpful too in discussing in addressing the substantive effects. Concern?
The Department of the Interior was not involved in the development of the report. We had 3 days to review the final draft.
And just for the record, I did issue 3 drafts to the Department of the Interior as the report was being developed starting in November. Yes, Chairman Franklin.
This is a tribe's dream right now to hear 2 agencies discuss consultation. So, Michael, first to you, I just want to acknowledge and tell you how much I appreciate the fact that Interior is looking after what it views as the best interests of tribes. That is an honorable thing to do. I appreciate that you are the voice of that at the moment. And it would also turn to our chair and say thank you as well for your efforts to look out for tribes in the best interest of us, especially in this report. We do view it as a report from the tribal side. We look forward to consulting with Interior on it and looking at any of the policies should they choose to adopt it, or the recommendations and turn it into policies. For tribes, that's where our expectation of consultation is. I want to offer myself that if at any point during these discussions you want to include the ACHP's favorite Indian of all time, that would be me, kind of. But I'd be more than happy to join those consultation meetings. Would look forward to sitting down with you as well, Michael, and talking about it. I think we did a disservice just now. I want to ask the National Park Service folks that are in the back of the room to stand up again. If you all don't mind giving them a round of applause and thanking them for what they do. So please stand up. Hand waves are just as good, and we know some of you very well. So I just want to acknowledge that the work that you do is in the best interests of tribes as well. So thank you so much, Madam Chair. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. The National Conference realizes this is a very important topic. And as such, a year ago, we established our own internal working group to begin looking at the Secretary's standards. But when we approach a topic like this, as we did 2 years ago with the National Register process, our process is rooted in collaboration. So we invited the National Park Service to participate in that process, since after all, it is their programs that we're talking about. I just have to note that I suspect that what you're experiencing here is a sense that perhaps you didn't collaborate from the beginning. And I think that's regrettable. But I don't think that it has to be fatal. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to continue the conversation. NICHPO itself has received 480 responses to a survey we deployed from stakeholders who use the standards. We are hosting a series of listening sessions coming up. We met with the NAFPO board recently to get their views on the Secretary's standards. So we know that there is a lot to talk about, but we really want to do it in a thoughtful, deliberative, and long game way, because The Secretary's standards impact everything. The National Register, Section 106, historic tax credits, local commission reviews. The impacts are huge. So we're very cognizant that when you start throwing out recommendations, and I don't mean that you threw them out, that's not the right term, so my apologies. But, you know, they basically set a baseline. And I think, and as we mentioned in the committee hearing, our primary issue with this report isn't the fact that you did it. I think the fact that it was issued as a report to the membership, but instead went out as a press release to the public, and then you had a listening session, and basically you're ginning up the conversation, which is great, but it didn't give the council an opportunity to discuss it, to evaluate it, to consider it before we went to that step. And I think in light of the fact that and at least this is my perception, and in light of the fact that that collaboration didn't occur with Interior and Park Service throughout the process, it just makes this a lot harder now for us to bring it back together. I hope we can. So please don't take it as a vicious criticism, but it's a concern that we have because we know the impact that the standards have on everything that we do.
Thank you. I appreciate that comment. You know, one of the things that I think is really important to underscore here is that the recommendations drew from many prior analyses, including NCSHPO analyses that have been published in the past. And they also drew almost exclusively from the comments that were received. So I think there's different ways to think about collaboration and different ways to think about the nature of documents, of conversation starters, of ideas that happened. You're right that members did not review and edit this report, and that was in many ways by design. If you remember some of our earlier conversations within committee about how this report should be written, how it should be developed, people didn't feel like, you know, they necessarily wanted to dig into a formal policy statement, a formal attribution from the council. And so once we got such a huge volume of public comments, you know, and everybody started to understand the nature of those comments, that's when I think that the tide turned and people recommended in this body that it be a report from the chair to the members. In terms of consultation to, you know, with specific members, again, you know, you can only collaborate when there's somebody on the other side. So I look forward and I take Mr. Martinez at his word that we can continue the conversations that I'm very hopeful that we have on these topics. But the nature of this report is different than anything that we've issued before, and it was in many ways by design. As for the issue of public engagement, the volume of interest in this topic is such that this is not something that the council is going to be able to safeguard and guide through the process. The volume of interest, the number of times that in my travels as chair, whether it's to a preservation event or a housing event or an environmental event, that the standards come up, it is the number one thing I have heard about over the last year. So, you know, in addition to drafting policy statements along with members where everybody gets a chance to weigh in and edit, in addition to, you know, all of the collaborative work we do on Section 106 agreements, again, this type of document is what I think a chair is supposed to do for the ACHP. I recognize that I'm only the second full-time chair. I continue to try to define that role, what it is that I should be doing, how I should be doing it. I think my record shows here at this council that I have a history of collaboration, that everything that we do as a council is a collaborative effort. The policy statements that we've made together are bold. They have moved things forward, and that can only be done through consultation. So while I appreciate the comments and understand where you're coming from, I think this is different. This is an attempt to try to understand what a chair of the ACHP can do It's maybe like a mayor and a city council, or, something along those lines where, sometimes the chair has to put out some ideas, put themselves on the line, and they make that presentation to have substantive conversations, and that's what this report was intended to do. So I do appreciate that, and I think this is all part of the process of understanding the different roles within our agency and the development of mine. Yes, Mr. Tickle.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Maybe it's just being from the Department of Defense. We probably have a slightly different view. We expect the leadership to put out, we call it sometimes commander's intent, where they're looking across their portfolio and saying, here's what I see as things we need to be working on. And that's not an end point, that's a starting point for after they spend some time in the job as to where they think they want to go and the things that they think need to be worked on. It's not here's go do this. It starts the conversation, as you said. For the most part, the recommendations we're good with. I think the approach is something that should fall into your job bucket of starting that conversation through a report, which seems to make a lot of sense to us.
Thank you very much. Anything else on this?
Yeah, if I may. I took this report as a member of this committee and really accepted it in what I think the intent of the report was, which is to spark a conversation. And, this is a tricky topic. It impacts every aspect of historic preservation at every level. And so it's not an easy conversation, but it's one that is an important conversation. And it's my hope that this report is able to fulfill its intent, which is to start a conversation. We're all going to have different opinions. We're not all going to agree on any recommendations when it comes to something so intertwined in the fabric of our work, but the need to assess this document has grown over the years and impacts preservation in ways that, in many ways it wasn't intended for. It's worked well, but it's also created challenges. And so I think it's an important conversation, and I think this is the right body to spur that conversation. So it's my hope that the intent of the report is able to be fulfilled and we can have the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to give this a go here. So I've really appreciated this conversation over the last several minutes, and I think it is a conversation that has long been needed, and I think it is a great point in this profession and in historic preservation writ large to hear this back and forth take place. And I really appreciated, Eric, your piece about the fact that these standards are so critical to everything that happens in historic preservation, everything that we discuss and how we think about this out in the real world and how decisions are made. I will just share, and I appreciated the Department of Defense's perspective here. I will share that in my review of the report, I welcomed the fact that it would bring some of these conversations to bear because they are being used, as we've just heard, in a variety of different ways, perhaps unseen at the time they were written. And there is truly a sense of urgency in the moment that we must also balance with strong, deliberative, and at times lengthy debate about what the future of this profession and the standards mean to it. We are facing tremendous challenges across the country in community development and resilience, the climate crisis, the housing issues that we are facing, the affordability of those housing issues. And so I just want to recognize this debate as really important and find a way for us to think about the deliberative, lengthy, hard discussions that I think are necessary while also striking towards the recognition that there are immediate needs that we cannot become paralyzed in also addressing, that are part of the utilization of the standards themselves.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me preface these remarks by saying that I'm very new, not only to this group, but also to the field of preservation, and am grateful for the conversation because I've learned a lot. And 8 weeks into the job, that seems to be what I ought to be doing, and I'm really grateful to you all. I will say that one of the things I learned reading this report, and I hope we can talk about its content at some point, was the way in which preservation tools, the tools of preservation, are so important now to address a multiple range of challenges that the country faces, and that people who are engaged with those challenges don't necessarily look to preservation automatically as part of the solution. And so this report, to me, dramatizes the importance of these efforts at a time when people who don't think of themselves as preservationists and perhaps don't necessarily, care about historical preservation can use these tools in really effective ways that accomplish the goals of preservation and also address these other urgent challenges. So I was heartened by that, reading your report, by the ways in which it's through the process that you used, you reached those voices, and they were able to connect those dots, which I, as someone, again, very new and in learning mode, really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate all of these comments very much. And so I do want to talk about where do we go from here. I think the word urgency is the word that I agree with most. So, in thinking about, we want to be deliberative, but we also want to do things urgently. There's obviously a tension there, and nothing will ever be perfect. I found in other fora, in other ways, including even at our local Planning and Zoning Commission, where we made a number of revolutionary changes when I served as chair of a city commission. The way to do that is to just have a lot of conversations first and just to tease out some of the issues. So one of the things, and I mentioned this at the committee meeting, that I'm going to hope to propose are webinars on specific topics. We'd love to co-lead those with the Park Service. I heard that you were, I heard your openness to that, and I'd welcome to that conversation. Things like housing, solar energy, energy efficiency, the new treatments, graduated National Register. I think those could be topics for future discussion. We are working internally, and in fact, this memo grew out of 2 policy statements that we wrote, where in both cases, this body said the federal historic preservation standards need to be more flexibly interpreted for housing and for climate. So while, that is a lot of the underlying theme in the report I issued, those 2 statements, flexibility in housing and climate, are things that this body has already voted on. And so as we were thinking about how to implement those, and we've started to develop guidance, I know Ms. Leushinger will inform us about some of those efforts later on in this meeting. And we'll hopefully do the same on climate-related matters. I'm going to be working with Reed between now and the next business meeting to try to figure out, some of the other things that we can do to structure a response from ACHP, because there is a role for ACHP here to try to think about, well, what do we do next? And it's at that time where we're thinking as a body, we're thinking beyond just one person's opinion, which I again have characterized this report. I view this report that conversation, with Reed and with others in this group, and Vice Chairman Tannenbaum, will hopefully we'll be able to set out a more robust plan in light of this conversation. But again, I really appreciate this. I think there is a path forward to try to have these conversations both urgently and deliberatively, in a way that leads to meaningful change, because I think the field is demanding it, and I think the field deserves it, and we as preservationists really need to think, this is not, and I've said this every single time I've talked about this report, this is not any one agency's, any one group's, any one staff's problem. This is nothing, nobody did anything wrong here. What we're trying to do is figure out, how do we now move forward given sort of this baseline that I do hope this report has set. So thank you, everybody, and you will hear more soon. And with that, I think we'll do your report, and then maybe we'll take a break. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brown, and I appreciate that. And I want to just thank you for your leadership and for doing so much to raise the profile of the ACHP in the short year or so that you've been here, and for opening so many opportunities to the ACHP to expand its reach and to tell the important things that we need to communicate to the public and federal agencies and others. I think it's been an incredibly productive year or so as well. As you mentioned, I'm just about a year into the position, in my permanent position as well, and I just want to express how proud I am of the staff for being able to provide the service, the support, and the necessary information for you all to do the work that you do. It's been an incredibly productive year with, as you mentioned, the policy statements, the program alternatives, the improvements to our operational procedures. So again, I think it's been an extraordinary year, and we very much appreciate your leadership. I wanted to just give you sort of a summary of where things stand with our budget and then touch on recruiting. I think hopefully many of you know that the ACHP on March 9th received funding for the remainder of 2024. Our thoughts are with those of you federal agencies around the table who have not yet received your funding, and our fingers are crossed for you. But we did on March 9th receive our funding at a level of $8,585,000, which was essentially a continuation of our FY23 level. And as such, that was a little less than $1 million less than we had asked for. So I just want to acknowledge that we had asked for about $9.5 million. And so going into the remainder of this year, we're operating with significantly less revenue than we had hoped. Now, $1 million may not sound like a lot to some of you agencies, but of course to a micro agency like that, like us, it's real money. So we're certainly going to have to be a little more cautious in our expenditures going through the remainder of this year, but I don't anticipate anything too painful. I certainly don't anticipate any staff reductions or things like that, but we'll certainly have to be careful as we go through the remainder of this year. I also wanted to just acknowledge that, again, like so many of our federal colleagues around the table, that our budget, along with all the other federal agencies' budgets, went up to the Hill on March 11th. The President announced the budget for FY 2025. We requested in that budget $9,544,000, which again would, if we achieve that, would bump us back up about another $1 million. And at the time that request went up, we issued a press release that called out some of our priorities for FY 2025. And I just wanted to touch on them very briefly. Of course, in 2025, we hope to continue I think the very productive work we've done with many agencies around this table and others on program alternatives, and work with the Permitting Council and others to advance sort of our collective goals on improving the efficiency and effectiveness of environmental review processes. Of course, we want to continue working to implement policy statements, and hopefully there'll be one more of those after today. And so it's very important for us to walk the walk. As the chair has indicated, it's important not only to put these policy statements out, but then work effectively and collaboratively with you all to implement them. So that's certainly an important goal for us in 2025 as well. Of course, we're also, as always, striving to make the preservation program more inclusive and continue our work with a number of agencies around the table here and others on advancing a more inclusive preservation program. And we're also still hopeful, as we had requested in 2024, that we will for the first time receive our own dedicated funding for a intern program. So we're continuing to ask for that, and we've got our fingers crossed that that'll be part of the FY 2025 funding. I also wanted to just give you a very brief personnel update and acknowledge first, before I do that, that we have recruited so many new positions and so many, we've had so many changes in our staff that I have a pretty long list. And so rather than go through it in detail, I just wanted to acknowledge to you first that it's been an extraordinarily productive year for us from a human resource standpoint. We have added a number of positions, again, thanks to your leadership and your work with the Permitting Council, Chair Bronin. We have been able to bring on and are in the process of bringing on and recruiting the 8 additional positions that were funded through our partnership with the Permitting Council. And we've also added a couple other positions. So it's been an extraordinarily productive year. And before I just summarize a couple of those changes, I wanted to thank Javier Marquez, who also wears our human resource officer hat. I think he has overseen more recruitment in the last year than he did in the 5 or 10 years before that. So thank you for that. And thank you also to the office directors who, in addition to doing all of the important work that they're doing to support your directives, have been doing a lot of recruitment themselves as well. So thank you for that. I want to just mention 2 retirements in part because they're dear friends and colleagues that have been with us for a long time. I think as you heard us mention in the committee meeting, LaShevia Johnson recently retired. She's gone. It was a month ago or so, but she had been with us for 34 years in our Office of Federal Agency Programs. And Dr. John Edens is a few days away from retirement. He has been with us for a little more than 18 years as well in the Office of Federal Agency Programs. So we very much appreciate their service to the ACHP. I also want to just very quickly mention we've brought 4 new staff on board since we talked to you in November. I want to first acknowledge that Kendra Tashoma is with us. She is our new equity officer. Kendra, there you are. Stand up and wave. There we go. There's Kendra. We're delighted to have her on board. She's our very first equity officer, and we're looking forward to working with her and benefiting from her own expertise as well. I also wanted to acknowledge that we've brought on a new IT specialist, Sam Perry, in our IT office, doubling the staff in our IT office by bringing him on. I don't know if you're out there, Sam, but thank you, and good to have you there. We've also brought in a new historic preservation technician, Dana Daniels, and we've also brought on a new Army liaison, Lauren Cooper. So thank you to the Army as well for your partnership, and we're happy to have her on board. I'm not going to go through the number of people that are about to come on board. I'm not going to mention them because I'll do that when we see you in July, but I just wanted to let you know 5 more people are about to start with us, and we'll let you know who they are when we meet again in July. And we're also recruiting for 7 more positions. So that may not sound a lot like a lot to you all, but for us, that's a really a great expansion of our offices. I also just wanted to acknowledge that we've got another great group of interns. We currently have 6 interns with us for the spring season. And I want to acknowledge that 5 of them are supported by a really great partnership with the Washington State Historic Preservation Officer. They've been very generous in providing support for interns as well. So 5 of them are working on some issues of mutual interest between the ACHP and the Washington SHPO, and we've got a 6th one as well. So our intern program is alive and well, and we're excited to be doing so much new and interesting work with these folks. Yes?
Just because Ms. Brooks is a good friend of mine, are any of the interns coming from Washington State native?
I don't believe any of them are native.
I'll make sure to mention that to her. Thank you.
Sounds good. Very good. All right. So a lot going on.
Let me just say, we will have at least 1 intern this summer with a tribal background, working full-time, I believe, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. And with that concludes my report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to take a break. There's coffee in the hallway, and for those online, go grab some coffee and come back, or popcorn, whatever suits your fancy. Okay, we're going to reconvene the meeting. And I believe for this item, 2 members of the Army staff will be seated at the table. So I'll have them call up Amy and Dave. maybe they, okay. All right, so thank you, everybody. And Amy and Dave, I think you guys are sitting up here at this table for the next item, potentially, according to Mr. Tickle. So I'll have you start there. Okay, so we're on to agenda item 4A, the program comment for Army pre-1919 historic housing. So just note for the record that the Army made its formal request for a program comment to members on March 4th. And that Executive Director Nelson shared it with members a few days later. Thank you to the Army for giving us some extra time to consider the program comments. So we now have until May 17th to comment. We expect to do that via unassembled meeting prior to May 17th. I'm actually going to turn to Vice Chairman Tannenbaum to have him summarize the discussion at the Regulations and Governance Committee on the program comment and any outstanding issues that may warrant members' attention.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. We'll call this the hoo-ah section of the meeting. So the committee received a summary of the program comment and the consultation efforts conducted by the Army. All ACHP staff comments were addressed and incorporated by the Army into the current PC. Let me just say, this is amazing. We're talking about pre-1919 housing, over 70% of which contribute to or are National Historic Landmarks. That's just amazing. So while many of the areas have achieved resolution and are consistent with the previous 3 program comments in place for other Army housing inventory, some topics may benefit from further discussion. These include the requirement under Section 110F of the National Historic Preservation Act to minimize harm to National Historic Landmarks to the maximum extent possible, use of substitute building materials, a little discussion about that earlier, and the inclusion of lease, transfer, and conveyance as management actions. It was clear from the discussion among the members at our committee meeting that more time is needed to discuss these items, and staff will be scheduling a meeting among the members shortly after, as Chair Brennan said, the consultation meetings take place in April and before the unassembled vote planned for the week of May 13th to the 17th. But a very, very productive discussion. And I see folks from the Army here who might want to make some comments. First, let me say, do the members have any additional input? And then Dave, are you okay? Ron?
Yes, let's recognize Mr. Tickle. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm happy to start off this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for your time to this issue. The majority of the Department of Defense and Infrastructure is with the Department of Army. There, among federal agencies, the Army faces unique and significant NHPA Section 106 compliance challenge due to the magnitude of its inventory of over 30,000 actively used and occupied historic homes. And that's the key part. These are not museums. There are people living in these homes that we need to maintain for quality of life. Housing is a retention issue. It's a huge issue within the Department of Defense across the board. The condition, everything from unaccompanied housing barracks to flag officers and government officers' quarters has been subject to lots of scrutiny over the past several years, and it is Secretary of Defense's priority to get that back to where it needs to be. So they are putting resources into that. Army and DoD confront many of the same constraints local governments, developers, state governments do, including challenges related to availability and cost of materials, scarcity of qualified tradesmen and contractors, conflict with building codes, seismic retrofitting, climate hazards, ADA compliance, a differing interpretation of preservation standards, and ensuring life and safety standards. Many of these are complicated by the fact that many of these are in very remote locations. Quality of life concerns as well as health and safety issues persist in pre-1919 Army housing. These challenges include outdated electrical, plumbing, HVAC systems, structural deficiencies, risk associated with asbestos and lead-based paint, constrained floor plans, and a backlog of deferred maintenance, repairs, and enhancements. The Army has encountered challenges due to inconsistency in application of the Secretary's standards during project reviews. We've been subject to varying interpretations of the standards of preservation and restoration that do not allow flexibility required for intensively used pre-1990 housing. This issue is not unique. The Department of Defense has been repeatedly citing comments throughout the Chair Bronnen's report on federal historic preservation standards. The program comment also improves process time and helps ensure that military families are not impacted by lengthy compliance review process times that delay their occupancy of assigned housing. The program comment ensures consistent application of the appropriate standards for rehabilitation and addresses escalating climate risk, underscores the ACHP's policy statement on climate change and historic preservation. Additionally, it further validates the constraints outlined in Chair Bronnen's report on federal historic preservation standards. The Secretary of Interior standards recognize that economic and technical feasibility of each project should be considered during application of the standards, and this requirement seems to be often overlooked during project-by-project reviews. The Secretary's standards for rehabilitations permit the use of substitute building materials when use of historic or in-kind material is not reasonably achievable. Such infeasibility may stem from cost constraints, but as identified above, it is also motivated by the imperative to enhance project sustainability, reduce energy expenses, and address climate impacts. It has also been further hampered in recent years by the global pandemic and supply chain disruptions. Finally, in support of the program comment and as part of their evaluation of historic properties, the Army has undertaken several initiatives. This includes compiling and analyzing the original Army Quartermaster Corps housing design plans, conducting extensive historic context documentation, and completing historic American building survey architectural documentation of pre-1990 Army housing. These valuable documents are assessed to the public through a centralized website, which we can provide. Furthermore, the Army has developed design guidelines for pre-1990 Army housing and building materials guidelines and a catalog for pre-1919 Army housing, providing essential guidance for preservation and restoration efforts. The approach we have utilized over the past 20 years has resulted in a significant backlog of unfunded projects. While the PC does not resolve all of our issues with our backlog, it is a very positive step in the right direction. The cost of maintaining historic buildings has not been lost on Congress, who has directed Army to demolish 3 historic homes on Fort McNair. We need your support in helping us maintain these historic, livable homes in an efficient as cost-effective manner as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tickle. Other member comments? Mr. Hine.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. The National Conference has a long history of working with the Advisory Council and with the Army on the issuance of program comments. I'm not going to repeat the comments that we made during committee, but I will stress that once again, we find ourselves in a position where the primary efficiency sought through this approach is the elimination of all consultation in perpetuity for the rehabilitation of these properties with state historic preservation officers. We continue to think that approach is problematic, and as such, we look forward to the continued conversation.
Any others? Okay. It looks like we may not need your added expertise. Thank you, Dave and Amy, for stepping up to the dais there. Thank you, Mr. Tickle. Thanks to all the staff who have worked on this topic on both sides, and we look forward to continuing this. I believe that we will have a member-specific discussion maybe at some point on this as well. So that's something to look forward to. Thank you. I will note, though, by the way, that the comments on my report, I appreciate those and how they're, I guess, being used to at least, again, continue the conversation and on housing. And yeah, I would welcome discussion on the substantive aspects of this with Interior, because I do think that housing is an opportunity that we have to really dig into, why do we have some of these issues and maybe a path forward. So I appreciate that. Moving on to number 4B, program comment for communications projects on federal lands and property. So this agreement, as you all know, is an amendment that I approved last week in accordance with the terms of the first version of the agreement, expanding a program comment to communications projects more broadly than the first one. Of course, this is a very important topic for the broadband industry, for the Biden administration, for the investments that taxpayers are making in expanding communications access to more people. So we were very glad to be able to work with the Department of Commerce, NTIA, and to hear from many that really helped to make the amended program comment a lot stronger. One of the things that I pointed out at the committee meeting, and I want to emphasize for the public here, is that this program comment marks the first time that tribes will be compensated for the services that they provide to federal agencies, services such as surveys and other things that other consultants, non-tribal consultants, would have, under the normal course of things, be compensated for. I felt that this was very important to ensure that we were upholding our government-to-government responsibilities. That has been a very significant priority for me as chair. And I encourage you to look at that provision in the program comment, because you will see it, at least while I'm here, proposed again and again in the discussions that we have on other program alternatives. So I wanted to thank again everybody who advised on the inclusion of that. I want to also recognize the executive order that President Biden issued that requires federal agencies and encourages independent federal agencies like ours to fairly compensate tribes for their efforts like this one. So we'll discuss a few related matters during the TIP Committee report, Tribal Indigenous Peoples Committee report, but again, just appreciate everybody who helped to bring that to a conclusion. Item C, the Nationwide Housing Program Alternative. We, as you know, in light of our Housing and Historic Preservation Policy Statement, I had called for staff to and council members to consider issues related to housing. This is going to be a constant theme. It's a theme today. It's going to be a theme, for again, the rest of my time here. I think, in many ways, having a coherent, clear approach to housing will help us build more housing, and that is something that is a critical necessity in our just the state of the world today. So I'm going to turn again to Vice Chairman Tannenbaum, ask him to summarize any efforts.
Thank you, Chair Bronin.
Great.
The committee received a thoughtful preliminary analysis from Jamie Luckinger and her team, who carefully reviewed the existing program alternatives related to housing and utilized information from the last 5 years of notifications to the ACHP about findings of adverse effect and technical assistance. While the staff emphasized that their recommendations are in the initial, underlined, initial stages and will need additional conversations with SHPOs and federal preservation officers to reach consensus on the appropriate path forward, it seems apparent that an agency-specific program alternative that is combined with an education component is needed. Before I turn, Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you for some additional comments, but let me also thank you and your team for the excellent work that you are doing, and just point out that Jamie is so efficient and so thorough that she found out what train I was coming in on from Fairfax County this morning, and amazingly met me at that car. So we could talk about this, and she could catch me up on some of the important items that I should emphasize. So Jamie, thank you. I am in awe of your planning.
And I planned it from Baltimore, sir, so I really, that took a lot, I won't lie. I think one of the, emphasizing again, preliminary and initial, but we really wanted to use the information that we have available to us about findings of adverse effect and the frequent requests for technical assistance. We also, again, spent a lot of time looking at existing program alternatives. One of the things I think we have all seen, and this council has seen as well, has been the benefit of looking at existing program alternatives that this group has already approved. And looking at ways to expand them, to modify them, to amend them the way that we just did for the communications program comment. Recognizing that there is a proven track record there, that we know how these things work. And so I think we're really interested in some additional conversations with federal preservation officers and with state historic preservation officers to further ground and refine our recommendations at a staff level. Also, any solution that we hopefully come up with, reflects a compromise between the parties involved. I think we've all heard, at a staff level, but even amongst this group, some of the challenges and program alternatives and wanting to have solutions that allow those consulting parties to have input too. So finding a balance there of hearing concerns from a lot of different parties and finding a solution that'll work for everyone. And, again, looking at what we've already got and seeing how we can maybe work better and work more effectively for more people. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I should have called Ms. Leushinger out too for the last item. Her leadership, as Vice Chairman Tannenbaum said, has been excellent, and we know she's also working on all of these fronts to really carry things forward. So thank you very much. We're going to put you on the hot seat again for the next item, which is the issuance of housing-related Section 106 guidance.
Sure. So there, again, we're starting an outline. The communications program comment has, I think, taken over a lot of our attention, and we also are starting guidance there. So concurrent guidance efforts on a lot of different fronts. Right now, what we're looking at, again, as a result of the housing policy statement, but recognizing some of these conversations that we're having about what does it mean to have an adverse effect. And the application of the criteria of adverse effect are only as successful as having a clear understanding of what makes a property historic. And that means, understanding the significance and integrity. So some of what we've started fleshing out as far as the guidance is really looking at the application of the criteria of adverse effect, but relating that to the identification of historic properties because they go hand in hand. For those who have taken a look at our reasonable and good faith effort guidance, where we kind of further define those concepts and then ask a series of questions, to kind of get agency officials thinking. That's kind of what I have in mind right now, is a series of questions to ask agencies and for consulting parties to think about of what makes this property significant and what lets it convey its significance, and how does that relate to then the criteria of adverse effect. I think from a practitioner's perspective, that'll be really helpful. So we're looking to finish that hopefully by the summer. In response to some comments, I think by the trust yesterday, we'll probably look at ways of making sure the members are aware of that guidance and can have a chance to provide some feedback on it before we move to finalize it. But again, looking at probably a summer timeline with some of the other things that we've got to get done ahead of us. But more to come hopefully in the July meeting.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, very much appreciate it. Turning now to item E on the Preserve America report. So this is the report known as the Section 3 report that the Advisory Council is required to deliver to the President of the United States. So this is a report delivered by the Council as a whole to the President of the United States. A highly formal document, a document much more formal than, say, my report that I issued to members. I wanted to note the exceptional work of our staff, including one of the primary authors here today, Alexis Clark. I don't know if Max Sickler is here today, but they should deserve a big round of applause. Their leadership as well, the leadership of Ms. Leushinger and Chris Keppel in compiling it, the work of the Office of Communications, Education and Outreach, Susan Glimsher and Shayla, always in editing, designing, and distributing the report. So I did deliver this to the President on February 15th. After that, I delivered it to federal agency heads. And the purpose of this report is to make recommendations that federal agencies can implement. Again, very similar to the report that I just issued. And I'm going to turn next to Vice Chairman Tannenbaum to update members on that work.
Okay, and I'm going to lateral real quickly to Jamie and to Susan.
I was going to say, and I'm going to pivot to Susan Glimsher, our Director of Communications, Education, and Outreach. To some extent, the report really relies on, at this point, OFAP
our office did the work of putting together the recommendations. Susan's team gets all the news out.
That was very well done, you guys. Thank you. Good morning. It's good to see everyone today. So just to echo Chair Bronin's remarks, a special thank you to everyone who worked on this report, Alexis, Max, and Chris Keppel, and Shayla, who really managed the design with the designer. So thanks to everyone. As the chair said, this report did go on time to the president, and it went to the director of OMB, the director of the Domestic Policy Council, Secretary of Interior, and as well to John Podesta, who is the senior advisor to the president on international climate policy. Obviously, we had a press release on the website, and the report was announced and shared via social media posts. All ACHP members received it. You should have all gotten it. If you did not, please let me know. And of course, we sent it out to all the usual suspects on our listserv, FPOs, SHPOs, National Preservation Organizations, Preservation Partners, tribes, et cetera, et cetera. As the chair mentioned, she did distribute this to the managing agencies, and it is our goal to make sure that as many people as possible read about the fine work that all of you guys are doing. So we did send it to key congressional staff, including our authorization and appropriations committees and the co-chairs of the Congressional Historic Preservation Caucus. The report has gone out to the federal agencies, specifically that submitted information highlighting their successes, and has gone out, of course, thank you, Lynn, to national press, working with our public relations firm Hatcher to further explore media opportunities. So we will continue to do that, and we will work with SHPOs and TIPOs to promote the excellent work that is described in the report. And then, of course, we'll start work to create little videos in conjunction with federal agencies to make sure that your success stories are shared. So again, we want to share this with as many people as possible. So any ideas you have for outreach are very welcome, and we do hope that you will share this report with your own audiences. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions or comments about the report? I have a question, which is, did this report undergo tribal consultation?
No, because it's a report on where agencies are reporting on their property assets. Reed probably can say it a little bit more eloquently for me compared to me. This is my first cycle going through it as the director of this office, so it was a learning curve for me in doing that. But again, the way that it's structured is for federal agencies to report out on their real property assets, and for the ACHP staff to then essentially collate it all into one cohesive report that is required by the executive order to then be delivered to the president.
With recommendations?
I actually don't know the EO language at this
Oh,
point. It's
but
been a
we did
while.
deliver recommendations. I just, out of respect for Interior, because I know we talked during the break that we may not have addressed your concerns on tribal consultation, I just wanted to allow you to object also to the Section 3 report's delivery.
The Department of the Interior is not in the position to give advice to the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation on these matters.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, you guys, for that. Item 5, Policy and Legislative Affairs, Operating Procedures. This is another important topic. We have asked the Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee and its members to allow for one more adjustment to the operating procedures that would allow the chair to convene a subgroup of the ACHP to address potential legislation to exempt programs or projects from Section 106 reviews rather than the full membership. So we have, as many of you know in this room, a long history of opposing exemptions to Section 106 and the value of having this efficiency in place. So I'm going to turn to Committee Chairman Ward to update the members on the committee's discussion and recommendations.
Thanks, Chair Broden. In January, draft changes to the operating procedures were circulated for member comment. 3 comments were received, none of them which objected to the basic idea. As described in detail in a paper in tab 1 of the meeting book, several language changes were proposed. Some were accepted and others rejected by staff and also by the PLA committee, which we reviewed the issues at its meeting this Monday. At this time, I would like to propose the following motion. Moved that the ACHP adopts the proposed amendments to Section 7A of the ACHP operating procedures set forth in the paper titled Operating Procedures Amendments dated March 8th, 2024 in tab 1 of the meeting book for the ACHP Spring 2024 meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. The adoption of these, actually discussion.
second?
Yes, discussion.
Well, a second.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Oh, a second. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Yes.
Javier gave me the eye, so I knew.
Okay, good. Seconded by Chairman Franklin. Thank you very much. I skipped ahead in my bullet points here. Are there comments? Yes.
So, yeah, DHS is concerned with this because I think it minimize or takes away some of the DHS secretary's authorities. That he has that statutory authorities to approve certain, waive certain laws, regulations, and other legal requirements. And so it wouldn't be appropriate for DHS council member me to support an action contrary to the administration or that secretary power. So our concern here is it sort of minimizes our vote. I guess I'm wondering, what is the problem that we're trying to solve with this?
I'll address the second question, then turn to Attorney Marquez for the first one, maybe, to how we address the concerns, or Member Ward. Okay, so just on the second one, the thought was that since the ACHP as a council routinely opposes Section 106 exemptions, seeing that there has been, at least perception-wise, an increase in interest in exempting certain activities and projects from Section 106, this would allow us to advise earlier and advise more frequently rather than bringing this to a full member vote each and every time. So I think the intent, because we have such a long history of opposing Section 106 exemptions, that we can do it more efficiently. I'm not sure we've ever voted down a request as a council to advise Congress to not exempt projects or types of buildings from or resources from 106. But I will turn to Attorney Marquez on your first question.
Yeah, and just briefly, the operating procedures already provide for the chair to take a position on legislation when time is of the essence, and the chair can take such an interim position after consulting with an appropriate subgroup of members. Beyond that, the language of the amendment specifically acknowledges that federal agencies typically follow administration statements of position, and typically abstain if there's no such position. So we believe that the amendment actually addresses those concerns.
So thank you for that, but I still think that what this does is this puts me potentially in a position of voting for something. I mean, we could submit that legislation. The department could support legislation that ACHP would not be in favor of. So I think, so for instance, DHS has previously identified certain circumstances in which it may be necessary to seek a legislative exemption to support, for instance, FEMA, disaster recovery actions. So DHS does not support efforts which would eliminate an opportunity to discuss this action with HP stakeholders. So I guess I'm still concerned with the actions that you may take may be contrary to where the department and the secretary want to go regarding legislation.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I would say is that will probably happen, has probably happened already, meaning that there are a lot of motions we've had about legislation where it passes just through a majority of those present and voting, even with agencies either voting against or abstaining. So just to let you know that that might have happened already, or it's a possibility even under the current operating procedures.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We have similar concerns. And you kind of view it a little differently too, is there's a difference between the chairman providing a position as opposed to the council providing a position. If you're able to provide a position, then obviously DOD has a different view. We didn't vote on it, so to speak. Even if we vote against it in a committee setting, we're still part of the organization that approved it. We have concerns that, once again, it would tie our secretary's hands in some cases, and we don't know what all these cases are. We kind of get into everything, just like FEMA. We don't know what the next problem's really going to be. So it really just, it raises big concerns within the department.
Thank you. Trying to look for that page, actually, of the operating amendments. So in doing that, I think you distinguish between conveying the position of the council and the chair, but I believe when I convene a subgroup of members and on these time-sensitive topics, that it is represented as a position of the council.
Correct, it would be a council position.
Yes, and that's the part that I think is probably more concerning.
That's what's in place now.
Yeah.
So that's what we can do now for the time-sensitive matters. Just to clarify, I just wanted to note that. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, I think then maybe we will turn to the vote, and I just moved my page, 1 second. As I'm shuffling papers up here. Okay. The adoption of this amendment to the operating procedure, since it requires a supermajority, so 16 votes in the affirmative, I will ask for a motion to adopt them.
Yeah, and we have wards.
We have, okay, now I'll have a second. My bullet points are awry here today. Second from Vice Chairman Tannenbaum. Any further discussion? Okay, so I'll turn to Ms. Shreves for a roll call vote.
Okay. And you are voting on the operating procedures amendments. Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum. Carmen Jordan Cox.
Aye.
Proxy for Frank Matero is Sunny Ward.
Aye.
Christopher King.
Aye.
Proxy for Monica Rhodes is Carmen Jordan Cox.
Aye.
Sunny Ward.
Aye.
Chairman Reno Franklin.
Aye.
Mayor Randall Woodfin.
Aye.
Representing the architect of the Capitol, Joe Imamura.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of the Interior, Mike Martinez.
Aye.
Representing the Secretary of Defense, Ron Tickle.
No.
Representing the Secretary of Homeland Security, Tom Chalecki.
No.
Representing the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Kristen Fontenot.
No.
Representing the Secretary of Transportation, Christopher Coase.
No.
Proxy for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs is GSA, Beth Savage.
No.
Representing the Administrator of GSA, Beth Savage.
No.
Representing the Chair of the Council on Environmental Quality, Anna Unruh Cohen.
Aye.
Representing the National Trust, Carol Quillen.
Aye.
Representing the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers, Eric Hine.
Aye.
And representing the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, Valerie Grusing.
Aye.
Chair Sarah Bronin.
Yes. I think we have to count this time. How exciting.
Madam Chair, that motion does not pass.
Thank you, and thank you for the comments. I mean, we certainly appreciate them, and I'm sorry that this didn't pass. It just means you guys will get more emails, because I think, you know, the vote on this, on individual items is a majority vote. So I predict that even though we didn't pass this fast tracking method, we will end up continuing to uphold our past positions. It could change, but uphold our past positions of exempting from 106 reviews. So you just bought yourself some more emails. Thank you so much, though. Okay, item B, the Climate Heritage Office. I just wanted to, we talked about this in the Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee meeting. The idea behind the creation of this office would be to help us expand on the things that we have said we wanted to do in the climate policy statement, develop a coordinating body for the many, many things that federal agencies are doing in this sphere, help with policy making, improve research and development on these policy topics, and I'm really looking forward to and I appreciate the support at the committee level. I'm going to turn to Member Ward to summarize that discussion, and again, appreciate your engagement on this topic, which I hope will bear some fruit soon.
Thanks, Chair Broden. At our meeting, the PLA committee had a very interesting discussion of the concept of a federal climate heritage office. No one raised major objections to the concept, although various commenters stressed the importance of formally surveying the work that federal agencies already are doing regarding climate change and historic properties. Many comments were quite positive. A number focused on the all-of-government approach such an office might encourage in federal policymaking on climate change and historic properties. There was interest in further exploring the role such an office could play in cross-agency coordination, collaboration with states, tribes, and local communities, and as a clearinghouse of information. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have comments on that? Again, we appreciate it. Moving to item C, which is the outreach and engagement on recent policy statements. So as you've heard many times already in this meeting, our implementation efforts rely in large part on our ability to engage with the public. It is something we've prioritized collectively, whether through documents, reports, ideas, blog posts, LinkedIn, all the things that CEO is doing. Whether it's through in-person engagements, including the upcoming conference on climate heritage, which will take place on October 4th, and it will be at Georgetown Law Center, our co-host, one of our co-hosts on that, and you'll hear more about that soon. Whether it's, as Ms. Leushinger was mentioning earlier, implementation through guidance, including on housing, and again, that was something that members called for in the statement, and we hope to carry forward, whether it's the Indigenous Knowledge Policy Statement that's coming up and all the public outreach that we've done on that, or other in-person events like our Los Angeles event, like one we will be doing in New York City in June. And we just look forward to those continued conversations, which again are required for us to really help carry forward some of the ideas that you all have set in principles in the policy statement. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Chair Broden. I'll just follow up also on our roundtable in Los Angeles. Conversations like we had are crucial and hard and difficult. It gets back to the use of the standards in our preservation community. In California in particular, we have a great preservation community and tax rebates that are not federally based, but just state-based, and so a lot of our preservation efforts there don't have the guardrails of 106. So I think just echoing back to conversations that we've had earlier today, it's very important that we have these difficult conversations about the standards. It's vital we work towards ensuring our heritage and preservation efforts and that they serve all communities fairly. This is more than a policy issue. It's about justice and inclusivity and protecting our shared history. we have to make sure that the standards aren't simply guardrails for keeping people out. So that's some of the discussion that we had locally in Los Angeles and California, and I look forward to having it here with you as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our last topical group of topics relating to tribal and indigenous peoples. We wanted to turn now to what I think is probably, hopefully, will be a consequential thing that we do today, which is a policy statement on indigenous knowledge, something that, as I've said before, is long overdue. It is part of our responsibility as a federal government to honor tribes and the government-to-government relationship, to honor our consultation with Native Hawaiians and other indigenous peoples. We are demanded to, we must fully respect and value the knowledge that they share with us. I'm going to turn to Chairman Franklin to summarize anything about the policy statement, including the final changes that were made, and I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is serious stuff, and serious stuff for Indian people starts with a little bit of humor. So as I look across at Mr. Tickle across from us, I'm thinking of the days of the CEQ early on, when there was always a bow tie at the table of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. And I cannot tell you how welcome of a sight you are in your bow tie, sir, and bringing that back and validating this fashion coming from the three cool cats and our other cool cat to my left. We were all talking about your bow tie and admiring that. So thank you for that. And I'm not buttering you up for a future vote, by the way. All seriousness, I spent my morning waking up and getting downstairs to the hotel that I'm staying at, that I always stay at. For 25 years, I've stayed at that same hotel. The doormen know my daughter's name, my son's name. They always greet me with a big hug. I was thinking, gosh, it's good to be somewhere familiar and comfortable. And as I was going in for my hug, I had a group of Native kids, Seneca youth from Allegheny, New York, a place that is right next to my daughter's reservation, very close to it anyway, in Lewiston, New York, Tuscarora Reservation, all part of the Iroquois Confederacy. These kids come up to me, they say, hey, they're looking at my beadwork, just like the mayor trying to possibly steal my shoes because they are beaded as well. And we started a little conversation with these youngsters about what it means to be here in DC and who they're representing. Powerful moment for anybody, much less a tribal chair who's spent his entire life doing this and whose kids are following in my footsteps. So to have these little ones sitting there, and I asked, what are you doing here? They said, we're lobbying. And I was like, oh, it's not a dirty word. You're right. It's good. Like, for what? Indian education. I was like, good job. That's the fight. That's the fight. And they asked what I was doing and, who I was, and I told them. And let them know that, I've been doing this for about 22 years, close to that, probably longer. And the importance of what they're doing, especially getting their feet wet at such a young age, and how I encourage my own children to do that. And what an honor it was to see the next generation. And I reminded them of one thing that was said to me years and years and years ago as I was in a meeting with Newt Gingrich, of all people, who looked at me and said to a young Reno Franklin, just remember to leave it better than what you received it. And it's like, damn, I've kept that the whole time. And here I found myself telling these kids this exact thing with the memory now of a 50-year-old Reno Franklin, telling them, remember, like, where you started, remember where you want to be, and always leave it in a better place. That's what's in front of you today, a better place. Indigenous knowledge is important to tribes because it is tribes. We don't see a separation of church and state. In my language, in Kashayatawi, in my culture, in my religion, just as with Ira's, the importance of maintaining your cultural ties, your understanding of the spiritual and sacred world around you, as important as getting that vote to become a tribal chairman or tribal council member. It is a vital part of who we are as Indigenous peoples. And I get the honor and the privilege of wearing two hats. So I can speak to how that feels for a Kashaya person. And I can also speak to how that feels for a Native Hawaiian person, a direct descendant of King Kamehameha. And I understand the importance of Hawaiian culture and indigenous knowledge and its place in that, and where that goes from water to sea, to air, to land, and everything inside of it. So we've worked hard on this policy. We intentionally extended this consultation with tribal governments in recognizing the uniqueness that some tribal governments can share things in certain seasons and they can't in other seasons, and wanting to make sure that we encompassed that entire calendar year to allow tribes to be honest with us in the ways that they can and to create a safe place for tribes to talk to us. And we've invited many of you, actually, we've invited all of you, and many of you have participated to listen in and just to see how tribes feel about indigenous knowledge. Hear it from them, not from me, not from Shasta or Val, but to hear it directly from tribal leaders. These conversations were at times difficult in hearing some of the atrocities and the wrongs. These conversations were uplifting to, the opinions of tribes and how this is going to change the playing field for us, to level it in the ways that it needs to be leveled. And most importantly, with few exceptions, tribes understood that our efforts here are to provide education to federal agencies, to tell you how to better partner with tribes, and to consider our indigenous knowledge and the sacred things that we'll discuss with you. To how to protect it in many cases. A lot of tribes brought up that issue of how do you protect what we tell you. It is a living and breathing document. It's something that as we hopefully adopt it today, that there will be future versions of this. We'd like to turn to the CEQ and just say thank you for those comments that you made, many of which were incorporated into it. And in the text thread that nobody else sees sometimes, it was like, wow, CEQ just dropped some good stuff in here. Like, all right, cool, put it in. And so thank you for that. It makes us better, and we'll continue to make it better because like Indian culture, all things evolve. Our cultures evolve. I tell people all the time, inside of my roundhouse at Kashaya, my ancestors never thought we'd need a cell phone policy. But yet here we are. Don't even have a word for it. But yet we incorporate that into it. So as that goes, so will this policy as well. So thank you for your contributing to this in the over a year that we have been consulting. I would like to say that this is the gold standard, platinum standard for what we should be doing with tribal consultation. We consider how we do that, making sure that for anything that has to do with sacredness, that we incorporate things that tribes ask us to do and to consider. I'm going to turn over quickly to, where you at? Oh, to my brother Ira to summarize a little bit, provide some numbers, some digits, some data, and then we'll get to it. Ira?
Lemlem's Reno, Hustle Halt to everybody. Ira Matt, Luis Quest. It's a good day. My name's Ira Matt. Appreciate being here, and it's always difficult following Reno anytime he talks. I don't have anything funny to say, but I'll just try to jump in and follow on what he said. Appreciate everybody here. This has, I think one of the themes with this policy, the development, is it's been very collaborative. CEQ came in towards the end, and there was a lot of things that they wanted to talk about, but the intent was to make it better. We had folks who came in earlier, provided us opportunities, Beth with the FPO Forum, Caroline Henry through the Department of Interior. We're constantly at NASPO's conferences. The key theme of this has been how folks have worked to make this a policy that can create that clarity, that can uplift indigenous knowledge, and that can make preservation more representative of the people. And I know we had some of that conversation earlier today about making it more equitable and representative. So a lot of this falls under the leadership of Sarah Brown and providing us that pathway. Having Reno there to actually, when I remember this conversation started, actually January 2022, Bill Dancing Feather, myself and Reno there, and we talked about it, and he said, just go do it. And he gave us a direction, which for me, I spent a better part of 2 decades working for my tribe. That's what I'm used to, hearing from the elders and getting a direction and then finding ways to achieve that. And, so gotta say, Lemlem Storino for all of the leadership he's had in the way that he helps us make it through these tough conversations, because it's a lot to bring in the voice of 574 federally recognized tribes, all the non-recognized tribes, the indigenous people, the Native Hawaiian, and try to find a document that's going to speak for them, to be broad enough to make sure that we're not restricting how they understand their lifeways, but to be direct enough that it helps federal agencies in that interaction. So a lot of the comments that we've even heard since January, since this went out for that final run and review, have been some of the same comments that we've been hearing, that this is needed. And everybody said it, tribes, feds, but the United Auburn Indian community had some comments that I felt were really great, that not only did they not ever really expect federal agencies to take this charge, but they didn't think they'd actually see something like this come to fruition. And so they were very happy to see this group of leadership here seek to make these sort of strides. Most folks, federal, tribal, they wanted to see that validation, which is an odd word to say, but that indigenous knowledge is self-supporting. It doesn't need other forms of information to justify it. Tribes shouldn't have to go find an archaeologist or an anthropologist to say, yes, the tribes are telling the truth. People wanted to make sure that this was broad and encompassing, and that actually goes back to some of the first conversations we had with the council. This isn't to be narrowly defined. Leaders like Jordan Tannenbaum, Jay Vogt, when he was on here, said to make sure that this is inclusive and not exclusive. That we talk about the role indigenous knowledge has in all 4 steps of the Section 106 process. That we speak about how it should really start Section 110 before we get to a point when an undertaking is accounted for, and that sacred sites should absolutely be led and instructed by that knowledge that tribes have, Native Hawaiians, other indigenous people. And there was actually a big call for the ACHP to lead this effort. People looked at that scope and authority. We've talked about it a lot today. Our charge to inform the president and Congress, to advise federal agencies. They wanted to see the council, which they know is more than just that 40-some person staff. Read, I don't know how many people we got now, as you noted earlier, but this collective mindset of these agencies and leads to come together and to find a mutually accepted path forward to integrate indigenous knowledge. And I think, as Reno alluded to, everybody was clear, in particular the tribes, this policy will not be enough. This is a step in the process, and we are already working towards a guidance document that's going to incorporate so many of the comments we got and so much of the direction to further inform how this policy can be implemented. And for those of you who were around when we passed the burial sites, human remains, and funerary objects policy, we quickly came after that with the guidance document that incorporated all of the comments we received from those months and months of outreach. But just to be clear, there were folks out there who wanted us to go much farther. They wanted a rulemaking, they wanted shalls versus should, they wanted this to be binding. And those requests came from tribes, they came from feds, they came from states, they came from all over. There were other folks that felt maybe we're pushing a little too hard and too far. Maybe our scope should be more narrow. But most folks supported exactly where we're at and the steps that we're taking in this process. I think, as Reno noted, we heard a lot at the end that was very important. Tailoring the language. Sometimes as feds, we're looking past how other people might see certain terms, and we got to fix a lot of those. A lot of the staff out there that supports you all helped us understand, don't use the word acquire. Make sure when we're talking about indigenous peoples, we're framing that so we're not excluding the recognition of Indian tribes and Native Hawaiians as indigenous peoples, but we're framing it with the unique structure that we have to work in, the regulations, which does have a definition for Indian tribes and Native Hawaiians. So the staff helped us walk that balance to make sure we weren't excluding or misrepresenting. And in the end, making sure that we accounted for things like the White House Council on Native American Affairs, the memorandum on sacred sites. So ultimately, as I noted, this was collaborative, so we appreciate that. And in the end, we heard some tribes talk about the fact that the statement, the strength of it, is that it's actually very reflective of all those listening sessions and engagement sessions that we had. And I think the specific statement from the Karuk tribe was what we did from January to July 2023. They can see it in the document, and that's the strength of the document, is that it's not us from the advisory council telling everybody how Indigenous knowledge should work. It's actually the voice of the people represented in the document. So with that, the goals for this policy, we wanted to elevate Indigenous knowledge as valid and self-supporting. We wanted to clarify its role in 106, establish some principles and guidelines in historic preservation more broadly, generate some consistency. We wanted to tailor CEQ and OSTP's guidance for federal departments and agencies on Indigenous knowledge, that broad guidance on Indigenous knowledge tailored to the historic preservation community. And we wanted to develop tasks, clear expectations for staff at the ACHP in partnership with others to implement the policy. And we've gotten a lot of feedback saying that those goals were achieved in this. And that's kind of the brief summary, the background. So I'll turn it back over to Reno.
Yeah, I think the last point that I'll make before turning it back to you, Madam Chair, is that this is the first time in my years of service on the advisory council, both as a council member and as an observer before that, that American Samoa has participated. That's covering some ground, and some water. All the way from Florida to American Samoa, we've had participation and comments, and to have them call in, I will just note that it's the first time, because I do speak a little bit of Samoan, mostly words that I can't say, because that's what we learn first. But it was fun chatting with her in Samoan in the chat during that, and her reaction right away was like, "Wait, oh, you're speaking Samoan to me?" She was so excited, I was thinking, yes. And it was just that part, I got a smile about this consultation process was intense. But for me, that was the last part of the calls, and it ended with American Samoa being on that call and getting to chat and just the good vibes, So, Madam Chair, yield the floor back to you.
Thank you, and thanks to you both for recognizing my small role, but I have to say that it's you who has shown the leadership here, Chairman Franklin, over the years. Of course, your leadership across all things, but this one in particular, Director Matt, you as well. How valuable you both are to leading this process at every step of the way, reflecting what ACHP values so highly, which is our relationship with tribes, with Indigenous peoples, with Native Hawaiians. I can't thank you both enough for your leadership in this. Again, it's incredibly important, everything that you've been doing. And I know you've done lots and lots and lots of meetings and heard from lots of people, and you've taken it all in and you've put it into something, which I think is exactly what we're supposed to be doing here at the ACHP, taking all of those voices, delivering what we think is the best possible product. And I think you've hit it on the head. So thank you both. I wanted to recognize another partner in this effort, Valerie Grusing, who's representing the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, and offer a chance for you to provide any comments before we proceed to the more additional formalities related to this policy statement.
Thanks, Chair Bonin. Don't know what I could possibly add to what has already been said, but I just want to, on behalf of NAFPO and Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, Tribal Culture Resources staff without a THPO, tribal members and representatives everywhere, I cannot overstate our enthusiasm and excitement to see this happening, to see the attention that's been given to it, gratitude for all of the staff and leadership time, and effort and passion and care in getting it to this point, and truly what a landmark moment this is. To reiterate the point that you made, Ira, about
Indigenous knowledge being valid and self-supporting. That is not the on-the-ground experience that is currently happening for tribes in interactions with federal decision-making processes. And so hopeful that this is the beginning of a transformational change in that experience. And that is really what I wanted to reiterate and add to this discussion. Thank you for your remarks, Chairman Franklin and Ira, and thank you for everything that you've done on this. It's wonderful to be a part of it.
Thank you.
I will entertain a motion, and then we can have additional further discussion.
moved.
Chairman Franklin has moved.
Second.
Oh, come on, who was that? You're going to have to decide. Did you say second? Second. I'll have NAthPO second that one. So thank you both for that. Any further discussion before we proceed to a vote?
Didn't hear who made the motion first.
You had raised your hand first, and then he vocalized it. Yes, he raised, he verbalized.
I offered a motion, but I'm happy to share the credit. Reno, Ira, and your team, congratulations. I support this policy. That's how I'm going to vote.
Thank you for making the motion. I'm glad that it was you.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, I was looking in your direction, and there's a buzzer situation. Do you have everything you need, Shayla? Yes, okay, you have that. Is there further discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. We have words and we have spirit. And I just want you to know that SHPOs are with this 100% in spirit. I mean, they have, in many cases, and I know you all know that in some states, without this backup, if you will, that they themselves have had a lot of difficulty making the case to advocate for the work that your members and that your colleagues are doing. So I want you to feel that and know that. That said, I just want to, as to words, I just want you to know that the spirit means so much to us that we're actually going to overlook some words, which we just want the record to reflect, that we continue to advise the advisory council that policy statements would be more effective if they were to break out where the federal roles are, where the state and local government's roles are, and where things are advisory versus where they are regulatory. And I know that that's come up in previous policy statements, but we're willing to overlook it for this one, and we'll be happily voting in favor.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
Anna Unruh Cohen on behalf of the Council on Environmental Quality, and I won't be as eloquent as anyone has already been, but do just want to appreciate Chairman Franklin and Matt and Kelly, and Ira and Kelly, helping us, answering our questions and taking our comments on board, and working with us on the statement. And I look forward to supporting it on behalf of CEQ when the vote comes around. And I would be remiss to say it is my much more learned and experienced colleagues who provided those comments, but I'm happy to be sitting in the seat here to convey that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so I think we have everything we need for Shayla to proceed with a roll call vote, and this is just a simple majority of those in present.
Okay. And we'll start Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum. Aye. Carmen Jordan Cox.
Yes.
Proxy for Frank Matero, Sunny Ward.
Aye.
Christopher King.
Aye.
Proxy for Monica Rhodes, Carmen Jordan Cox. Sunny Ward.
Aye.
Chairman Reno Franklin.
Should I say nay, just for, I'm saying, aye, sorry.
Mayor Randall Woodfin.
Aye.
Representing the Architect of the Capitol, Joey Mamura.
Aye.
Representing the Secretary of the Interior, Mike Martinez.
Aye.
Representing the Secretary of Defense, Ron Tickle. Representing the Secretary of Homeland Security, Tom Chalecki. Representing the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Kristen Fontenot.
Aye.
Representing the Secretary of Transportation, Christopher Coase.
Aye.
Proxy for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Beth Savage.
Aye.
Representing the Administrator of the General Services Administration, Beth Savage.
Aye again.
Representing the Chair of the Council on Environmental Quality, Anna Unruh Cohen.
Aye.
Representing the National Trust, Carol Quillen.
Aye.
Representing the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers, Eric Hine.
Aye.
Representing the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, Valerie Grusing. Chair Sarah Bronin.
Yes.
And Madam Chair, that motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, very much appreciate that. And I had asked at the last meeting that we pass this unanimously, as we did a similar policy last year, and we did, and I appreciate that. So moving on to the Native Hawaiian Interagency Working Group Memorandum.
Sure, no problem switching gears there.
Yes.
It's an emotional moment. Thank you to all of you. Unanimous is that. It's unanimous. There's things that deserve that and some things that deserve good discussion. We heard that earlier today, some good points made up. Appreciate that, and presented. But I really quickly just want to take the time. Again, there's several council members. This started, like Ira said, back in '22, when we kind of had an idea like, hey, here's a problem that's identified. Let's find some solutions. At the time, my brother, Colonel Tenenbaum, encouraged us in his interim role to move, see what we can get done, And unfortunately for Ira, as a tribal chairman that I am, I try to avoid as much stuff that, roadblocks as possible, just quickly get through them, understand why they're there, and very oriented towards get this done. And, two former TIPOs got it done, along with a lot of other hardworking staff. And all of you and like you admitted, other people that understand these things sometimes better in the reviews. So my thank you, my yahui goes to all of you that took the time to review this. It wasn't a 600-page document. But it was something that every person here had a hand in. And so again, my heartfelt thank you to you. Generations before, generations after, from my doorway to your doorway. Thank you. Moving on. So you all know, I'm Native Hawaiian also, so I get the benefit of knowing how to call you ugly in 2 different languages. So, is what it is. We've been working on talking about having a discussion about the interagency working group memorandum of understanding for Native Hawaiians. And, we were blessed to have a presentation at the TIP meeting that I was on a plane on my way here for this meeting. And so thankfully Ira took that. And we had Kimo, who was the director of the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations for the U.S. Department of Interior, show up and just discuss this, give us some good points, talk to the committee about the importance of the MOU, and it's not something that's wasted on me at all. I reached out to our chair and asked her for help for a very, very Native Hawaiian issue with the Kona Historical Society, and got a good understanding in that process of what's needed in Native Hawaii to preserve parts of the culture. And they have the original maps in their possession of the water grants. So there's land grants that get provided, and King Kamehameha, as King of Hawaii, did that. He said, here's who gets what piece of land. And it's always been interesting to me that several were for non-Native Hawaiians as well. And those maps they have at the Kona Historical Society, they're the water maps. And so if you ever look at that telescope that's on top of the hill, one of the biggest concerns is, yes, the telescope on top of the hill, and propose more of them. But also the water that's underneath it and the poisoning of that water system. And so it was on the king to say who got what water. and there's symbols on these original maps that dictate who the individuals are, the families, and are sacred and sensitive to Native Hawaiian people. There's only one set of those maps on the planet, and they're not digitized. And Hawaii, unfortunately, as you all know, has been hit pretty hard by wildfires. And certainly where the Kona Historical Society is, right there in Kailua, right halfway up the hill, they're under constant threat now with wildfire. And so getting the resources to digitize, getting the, federal agencies all in agreement that yes, historic preservation is also the preservation of data that exists that can help define and explain interpret what some of these sacred sites are. So firsthand understanding and knowledge of that and feeling it, and seeing the concern and meeting with them, I'm happy to make connections. Thank you, Chair Bronin, for that. And I'll look over to Ira. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that and summarize some more of what was recommended to us?
Yeah, so we were fortunate to have Chemo show up to talk about, the foundation was the draft Memorandum of Understanding among participating agencies of the Native Hawaiian Federal Interagency Working Group, long name. And I'm going to try to summarize, but Chemo is an expert in Native Hawaiian relations, got a lifetime of experience, and what he did in this discussion, I'm not going to be able to do justice to. So I'm just going to recommend now that you guys refer to those meeting book materials and that you reach out to Chemo yourself to help provide some additional context. But what he was really coming to do was talk about that MOU and our efforts to renew it for a third iteration. The first was in 2011. The second iteration was in 2016. And those prior versions of the MOU haven't had a ton of signatories. They've had the Advisory Council, Department of Interior, and Department of Defense, with the latter two being quite significant, given that, per Chemo's statements, they manage over 95, nearly 100% of the land out there in Hawaii. So these groups, all three of us, have been working together for quite a while and have come up with some significant achievements, even prior to the first MOU. As Chemo noted, the Department of Interior's Native Hawaiian organization list has resulted from this collaboration. The Department of Defense consultation policy with Native Hawaiian organizations, ACHP's handbook for consultation with Native Hawaiians. So there's been a lot of good that has come from this. Now, when Chemo was doing this, he wasn't simply talking about the process like I am. He was addressing the legal status of Native Hawaiian organizations, the federal responsibilities to consult, historical and ongoing challenges. He really braided in all of this context while helping to educate the committee about this. And it also it led him to outline the next steps that he was hoping folks would take into account. And that is to expand the MOU to include additional signatories. And part of the MOU now is not just saying, hey, let's collaborate and develop some of this. He presented two documents that the Department of Interior has already developed that they're asking signatories to adapt or adopt their existing standards to. And one of those is their standard operating procedures for consultation with the Native Hawaiian community, and the other is a Native Hawaiian language policy. And essentially, what these documents are, the standard operating procedure, provides basic steps for working with the Native Hawaiian community, a framework, and it's intended to complement and not supersede any existing laws, rules, statute, or regulations. But as Chemo noted, because there is such a lack of awareness and understanding and knowledge, and because of the challenges that the Native Hawaiian community has in particular, which are unique from Indian tribes, but also many of those same challenges, they want to do their best to get agencies to find consistency in their approach to the Native Hawaiian community. And the same goes for the Native Hawaiian language. They want to ensure that when it is utilized, it's done respectfully in accordance with the culture and the people. And these are documents that they have spent years developing. Advisory councils commented, other agencies, but most importantly, they've had a lot of guidance from the communities out there. I know we're short on time, so I'm gonna stop it there. I'm gonna turn it back to Reno. But if people have questions, we did include the standard operating procedures and the language policy in the meeting book, along with the draft version of the MOU.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ira. And I would just add that, take a look at that MOU, and they're definitely, like Ira was referring to, we're hoping that, more agencies, if you see the need, you'll jump in, and sign on for that MOU. It's very important to Native Hawaiian people and to us in historic preservation. So thank you, Madam Chair.
I second that encouragement, and hopefully, everybody here, the federal agencies here have that background knowledge in order to help them make that step. So please feel free to come to any of us to talk more about that, that opportunity. I think we just have one item on our agenda left, which is a brief report and discussion on the executive order on federal funding. As I mentioned earlier, the amended program comment on communications projects on federal lands did relate to, we added a provision specifically in light of the executive order on that. And I'm happy to turn it over to you for further discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and we appreciate that. It's, we're getting ahead of these things as that was a quick presentation by the president, or a quick, executive order that he had issued, and it was in line with the Tribal Nations White House Summit, which is just an amazing thing to participate in. I'm gonna look at Ira, and I know that we had Morgan Rodman, who participated in our last TIP meeting and came in and did a presentation on it. And it's always nice to be the Indians that are in the way of people in their lunch, and that's us at the moment. So, sir?
Yeah, we're in a tough spot here. Yeah, we had a good meeting. We had a lot of guest stars, really, between Kimo and Morgan Rodman, who's the executive director for the White House Council on Native American Affairs. And this executive order 14112, it's got a long name. We just call it the Federal Funding One now. But it's really about the federal government living up to its trust responsibility to Indian tribes and helping empower the next era of self-determination, in particular, by looking at the funding, the programs, and the practices, and finding ways to remove barriers and further empower tribal nations to take that on. This was signed, as Reno noted, at the last Tribal Nations Summit. I wasn't far away from the president when it happened. It was a great time, and they've been moving quick. And we invited Morgan for that reason, because a lot of the focus happens to be on funding, which there's unfortunately not a lot of in historic preservation. But that's not the only focus, and you heard the chair talk earlier about how we are able to bring it in to these practices and programs that we do have. So when I met with Morgan, I noted the amount of agencies, the amount of leadership, but the focus on historic preservation. And so he was excited to show up and do that presentation himself. He took time away from a conference he was at. And it was pretty impactful on him as well, because the very next day we were in a White House Council meeting, and he actually talked about coming to the Tribal and Indigenous Peoples Committee meeting. He noticed how happy he was to have a group of people focused on a topic like historic preservation, to be able to really, he said, try to turn those light bulbs on and to figure out how we can use that as a tool for us, not to look at it as a mandate that's imposed on us, but as a tool we can leverage as in the historic preservation community. We seek to make sure that we can empower tribes. And he outlined basically where things are moving, the EO generally, for folks out there. He talked about how the White House Council, along with OMB and Domestic Policy Council, are taking a lead in the collaboration. They've developed subcommittees and are already bringing together staff to figure out how this can work. What are the budget considerations? What are your agency responsibilities and opportunities out there? He talked about the expectations. There's a 240-day timeline for OMB and DPC to provide guidance to federal agencies, which then falls on to us within 540 days to use that guidance to identify funding needed by our agencies and to outline some of our existing funding and support programs. in the end, what's going to happen is OMB, DPC are going to use our agency reports to identify any budgetary, statutory, regulatory, or other changes that may be necessary to ensure that federal laws, policies, practices, and programs support tribal nations more effectively. And these are recommendations that are going to be submitted to the president, and then agencies shall consider these in developing our budget in the next cycle. So there's going to be a big range and an expectation, and it really relies on these internal experts that understand the intricacies, the challenges, and the hurdles to help flag some of that so it can get elevated. And B, and I'll tell you, I think we as a group already know this, and Anna probably knows this, but you know, I'm detailing it at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Historic preservation's not always the topic that catches everybody's attention, and it's not always raised. So this is an opportunity for this group to help create more awareness and transparency of the challenges that are out there and the good that can come from empowering tribes and making sure they're more capable to participate in the process. So Morgan also detailed a number of actions and expectations agencies should be taking now, whether that's compacting, contracting, co-management, and co-stewardship, taking into account the unique needs, the limited capacity, and the barriers faced by tribal nations. But consistent with the conversation I feel like we've been having all day, and I'll kind of quote this, to respect tribal data sovereignty and recognize the importance of indigenous knowledge by, when appropriate and permitted by statute, allowing tribal nations to use self-certified data and avoiding the establishment of processes that require tribal nations to apply to or obtain permission from state or local governments to access funding or be part of a program. So they're trying to break down those barriers, those extra hurdles that tribes face. And Reno, as a tribal leader, could probably go on for quite a few hours about all of these additional steps they have to take in this. Great conversation from USDA with Morgan about the dashboard they're pulling together so agencies can bring in all of their opportunities for tribes to a centralized location. NASPO, through Shasta, talked about examples with funding hurdles and challenges faced by tribes in historic preservation. And Chair Bronin outlined the program comment and how an agency as small as the Advisory Council, with somewhat of a narrow scope, was able to look at this and find ways to implement the executive order in our arena. So it was great. Like I said, Morgan really appreciated this, and he actually recommended to everybody on that call the next day that, similar to the presentation he gave to us, he actually urged other agencies with other responsibilities to invite him in so they could have more of these conversations. So we're hoping to continue this in the coming months. We're going to keep asking the questions. What can the ACHP do? How can we help you all? But this executive order is meant to be a tool to help us that we can leverage. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Reno.
We have two more items we'd like to present on. Just joking. No, Madam Chair, just take the second to recognize you and thank you for advocating for tribes in your first year as the chair of the Advisory Council. You have managed to tackle some things that I have been working on for 20. So thank you so much for that, and that ends our report.
Thank you, Chairman Franklin. Thank you, Mr. Matt, again, for your presentation. And I think this is a great series of topics to end on. I think it really kind of frames what we've been talking about today, the importance of really digging into issues, the process, the substance, in collaborating as needed and leading as needed, and looking at ourselves as an agency. I'm going to end where I started, which is we are very powerful as an agency. We have the ability to influence a lot of different things. And I think, again, there are lots of different ways that we will do this. And we do this already. We'll continue to do this. Technical things like agreements and guidance, bigger things like policy statements, other public engagement type things, which themselves, I think, have a lot of value. So we do talk to each other. The 28 of us are 24 members and 4 observers, but we also have to have a direct relationship with the public as well. And I think all of you recognize that, and we're continuing to do that. We're tasked with doing what we're doing right now and how we're digging into these issues. We have been since 1966, when the National Historic Preservation Act was written. And maybe, as you said, I'm trying to consolidate 20 years into 5 minutes. But to me, I just feel this incredible sense of urgency to tackle all of these interconnected issues. And I appreciate, the patience with me as I try to do that. So with that, it is 11:59, and I always end on time. So I'll just say that the next meeting will take place July 17th through 18th. We were planning on potentially going out west, and I want to thank Ann Walker for her preliminary planning, more than preliminary, extensive planning for that. But unfortunately, we, for the budget reasons that Reed mentioned, of course, he tasked me with announcing that we will be meeting in Washington, D.C. again this summer. And maybe at some future point, we will head out west. But again, just wanted to really appreciate Ann's guidance in that, and save all of our notes, because you never know, we could head out there soon enough. Thank you. With that, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody.